I never thought my own sister would be the one to destroy my entire family on what was supposed to be the happiest day of the year. But here we are, and honestly, I'm still trying to wrap my head around whether I was justified in what I did next, or if I went too far. On my 28th birthday, my sister Sarah handed me a DNA test kit in front of my entire family during dinner, and said with this smug little smile, "Let's see if you're really one of us or just another man's mistake." And everyone laughed like it was the funniest joke they'd ever heard. But I saw something in my mother's face that made my blood run cold. Was I wrong for opening that test, confronting everyone with the results, and watching my family implode right there at the dinner table? Or would you have done exactly what I did? Let me take you back to the beginning, so you understand how we got to that moment. I'm the youngest of 3 kids in what I always thought was a pretty typical suburban family. My older brother Marcus is 32, my sister Sarah is 30, and then there's me, the baby of the family who apparently never quite fit the mold everyone else seemed to slip into so easily. Growing up, I always noticed little things that seemed off, like how I was the only one with green eyes while everyone else had brown, how my hair was this light auburn color while the rest of my family had dark brown or black hair, and how I was built completely differently from my dad and brother, who were both stocky and muscular while I was tall and lean. But kids don't really question these things, you know. You just assume genetics are weird and random, and you go about your life thinking you belong, because why wouldn't you belong in your own family? My parents, Linda and Robert, were always good to me, don't get me wrong. They provided for us, sent us all to decent schools, showed up to our events, and did all the things parents are supposed to do. But there was always this subtle difference in how they treated me compared to Marcus and Sarah. It wasn't anything I could put my finger on exactly, just a feeling I carried around like a weight in my chest. Marcus was the golden child, the firstborn son who could do no wrong, who got into a great college, landed a high-paying job in finance, and married his high school sweetheart. Sarah was Daddy's little girl, the princess who was spoiled rotten but also genuinely talented and smart, working as a successful marketing executive and always knowing exactly what to say to make our parents beam with pride. And then there was me, the one who was always just a little bit on the outside looking in, the one whose accomplishments were met with polite smiles instead of the enthusiastic celebrations my siblings got. I went to a good state school, not the Ivy League institution Marcus attended, and I became a graphic designer, which my dad never quite understood as a real career, the way he understood Marcus's job or Sarah's corporate position. I dated people my parents never seemed to fully approve of. I made life choices they questioned, and I always felt like I was trying twice as hard to get half the recognition. But I loved them, you know. They were my family, and I convinced myself that these little differences didn't mean anything, that I was just being oversensitive or reading into things that weren't there. Sarah and I had always had a weird relationship too. We weren't close the way some sisters are, sharing secrets and being best friends. Instead, there was always this undercurrent of competition and judgment from her side. She'd make little comments about my life choices, my appearance, my career, always wrapped in this veneer of sisterly concern, but with a sharp edge that cut a little too deep to be purely innocent. There were times when I'd achieve something I was proud of, like landing a big client or winning a design award, and Sarah would congratulate me, but then immediately pivot to talking about something better she'd accomplished, as if my victories needed to be diminished in comparison to hers. I remember one particular incident from when I was in high school that should have been a red flag, but I dismissed it at the time. I had won first place in a regional art competition, something I'd worked incredibly hard on for months, and when I came home excited to share the news, Sarah looked at the trophy and said, "Well, I guess it's good that you found something you're decent at, since academics were never really your strong suit." My parents had laughed it off as sibling teasing, but the comment stung because my grades were actually pretty good, just not perfect like Sarah's had been. It was moments like that, scattered throughout my childhood and young adult life, that created this pattern of me feeling like I had to constantly prove my worth while my siblings just existed in their golden pedestals. My dad and I had a particularly strained relationship that I'd always attributed to us just being different people. He was a former military man, very traditional, very much about hierarchy and respect and following a certain life path. He'd wanted me to go into something practical like engineering or law, and when I chose art and design, I could see the disappointment in his eyes even though he never said it outright. There were times during family gatherings when he'd be deep in conversation with Marcus about investments or sports or whatever, and I'd try to join in and he'd barely acknowledge my presence, like I was just background noise. My mom was warmer, more nurturing, but even she had this way of treating me that felt different. She worried about me constantly, always asking if I was eating enough, if I was taking care of myself, if I was making good choices, but it felt less like motherly concern and more like she was waiting for me to fail or mess up somehow. With Marcus and Sarah, she was proud and confident in their abilities, but with me, there was always this underlying anxiety, like she wasn't quite sure I could handle life on my own. I'd brought this up to friends over the years, this feeling of being the odd one out in my family, and they'd usually say things like all families have dynamics, or middle child syndrome affects everyone differently, even though I was technically the youngest. I'd started to wonder if maybe I was just overly sensitive, if maybe I was creating problems where none existed because I had some deep-seated insecurity I needed to work through in therapy. So when my 28th birthday rolled around, my mom insisted on hosting a family dinner at their house like she always did for birthdays. It was supposed to be a nice evening with my parents, Marcus and his wife Jennifer, Sarah and her husband Tom, and me. I had been dating someone for a few months, but we'd just broken up the week before, so I showed up alone, which immediately prompted a round of concerned questions from my mother about why I couldn't seem to maintain a stable relationship. Already I was feeling a bit raw and vulnerable, but I plastered on a smile and tried to enjoy the evening because it was my birthday and I wanted to believe my family genuinely cared about celebrating me. We sat down to dinner. My mom had made my favorite meal, which was her lasagna and garlic bread, and for a while everything seemed normal. We talked about Marcus's latest promotion, about Sarah's new client that was going to bring in huge money for her firm, about Jennifer's pregnancy announcement which they'd shared earlier that month, and about Tom's golf game. When it came time for gifts, I was genuinely touched that everyone had brought me something. Marcus gave me a nice set of professional design tools that I'd mentioned wanting, along with a gift card to an art supply store. My parents gave me some money, a generous check actually, and a gift card to my favorite clothing store, which was thoughtful even if it felt a bit impersonal. And then Sarah stood up with this wrapped box and this strange glint in her eye that I couldn't quite read. She handed it to me with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes and said, "This is something I think you really need." I unwrapped it slowly, confused by her tone, and inside was one of those commercial DNA ancestry test kits you see advertised everywhere, the kind that tells you your ethnic background and connects you with relatives. I looked up at her, not understanding what the joke was supposed to be or why this was an appropriate birthday gift. And that's when she said it. "Let's see if you're really one of us or just another man's mistake," Sarah announced loudly enough for everyone at the table to hear, and then she laughed, this brittle, sharp laugh that echoed in the suddenly quiet dining room. My dad chuckled uncomfortably, Marcus snorted into his wineglass, and even Tom, Sarah's husband, let out a nervous laugh. But what made my stomach drop, what made every hair on my body stand up, was my mother's reaction. Her face went completely white, all the color draining out of it like someone had pulled a plug, and her hand started shaking so badly that she had to set down her fork. She didn't laugh, She didn't smile. She just stared at Sarah with this look of absolute horror, and then her eyes darted to me with something that looked like panic mixed with guilt. In that split second, everything I'd ever wondered about, every little inconsistency I'd noticed and dismissed over the years, suddenly came crashing together in my mind like puzzle pieces, finally clicking into place. The room felt like it was spinning, and I could hear my heartbeat pounding in my ears. "What did you just say?" I asked Sarah, my voice coming out much calmer than I felt inside. Sarah's smile faltered just a little bit, like maybe she was realizing her joke hadn't landed the way she'd intended, but she doubled down anyway. "Oh, come on, it's just a joke," she said, waving her hand dismissively. "You've always been so different from the rest of us. I thought it would be funny to see where you actually come from. You know, since you don't really look like you belong to this family." The table went completely silent. Marcus was staring at his plate. Jennifer looked uncomfortable and confused. Tom was avoiding everyone's eyes. My dad's jaw was clenched so tight I could see the muscle twitching, and my mom looked like she was about to throw up or pass out or both. "Mom," I said slowly, turning to look directly at her, and I watched as tears started forming in her eyes. "Mom, is there something you need to tell me?" My father stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "This is ridiculous," he said gruffly, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. "Sarah, that was completely inappropriate. Apologize to your sister right now." But I wasn't looking at my dad anymore. I was staring at my mom, watching as a single tear rolled down her cheek, watching as 28 years of secrets and lies played out across her face in real time. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, and those 3 words confirmed everything I'd been too afraid to consciously acknowledge my entire life. The room erupted then. My dad started yelling at my mom, demanding to know what she was apologizing for. Marcus jumped up and started asking what the hell was going on. Sarah's face went from smug to shocked as she realized her cruel joke had actually hit on some terrible truth, and I just sat there, holding this stupid DNA test kit in my hands, feeling my entire identity crumbling around me. So that's the situation I was in, sitting at my own birthday dinner, holding a DNA test that was apparently going to confirm I wasn't actually related to the people I'd called family my whole life. Watching my mother cry and my father rage and my siblings panic. Before I tell you what happened next, I want you to pause and comment below what you would have done in my shoes. Would you have just left right then and there? Would you have demanded answers immediately? Would you have actually taken that DNA test or thrown it away and pretended the moment never happened? Because I need to know if what I did next was justified, or if I completely destroyed my family over something I should have just let lie. I stood up from the table, and everyone immediately stopped talking and looked at me. "I'm going to take this test," I said quietly, my voice surprisingly steady despite the fact that I felt like I was falling apart inside. "And I'm going to do it right now, and we're all going to wait here until we can send it off tomorrow, and then in a few weeks, we're going to have this conversation again with actual facts instead of secrets and lies and cruel jokes." My dad tried to protest, saying we should all just calm down and talk about this rationally, but I cut him off. "No, Dad, or whoever you are to me, we're doing this my way. Mom clearly has something she needs to confess. Sarah apparently knows more than she's letting on, and I deserve to know the truth about my own existence." I went to the bathroom, did the cheek swab right there, sealed it in the provided envelope, and came back to a dining room that looked like a bomb had gone off. Sarah was crying now, saying she was sorry over and over, that she didn't know it was actually true, that she'd just been making a mean joke because she'd always been jealous of how much Mom seemed to protect me and baby me compared to her. Marcus was pacing back and forth, running his hands through his hair, looking like his whole world had just been shattered. My dad was sitting down now, his head in his hands, looking older than I'd ever seen him look. And my mom was just sobbing quietly into a napkin, unable to even look at me. "Tell me," I demanded, standing in front of her with my arms crossed. "Tell me everything, right now." And that's when the whole sordid story came out. My mother had had an affair 9 years ago, shortly after Sarah was born, and she was dealing with severe postpartum depression that had gone untreated. My dad had been deployed overseas with the military, gone for months at a time, and she'd been alone with 2 small children and drowning in mental illness that nobody in their conservative family would acknowledge or help with. She'd met someone, a colleague from work, someone who'd been kind to her and listened to her and made her feel seen in a way she hadn't felt in years. The affair lasted 6 months, and when she got pregnant with me, she genuinely didn't know who the father was. She broke off the affair. My dad came home from deployment, and when I was born, everyone just assumed I was his, because why wouldn't they? But as I grew up and started looking less and less like anyone in the family, my mom started to suspect the truth, and apparently so did Sarah, who'd overheard a phone conversation between my mom and her sister years ago where my mom had confessed her fears. Sarah had held onto this information like a weapon, waiting for the perfect moment to deploy it, and apparently my birthday dinner seemed like that moment to her, though she claimed she thought it was just a suspicion, not confirmed truth. My dad had never known, or if he had suspected, he'd never said anything, choosing instead to just treat me differently, keep me at arm's length, never quite let me all the way into his heart, because some part of him always knew I might not be his. Hearing all of this, learning that my entire life had been built on a lie, that the reason I'd always felt like an outsider was because I literally was an outsider, that my own sister had known about this and used it to hurt me, that my dad had suspected and treated me coldly because of it rather than loving me anyway, it was too much. I looked around at these people who I'd spent 28 years trying to earn love and acceptance from, and I felt nothing but anger and betrayal. "Who is he?" I asked my mom, who's my biological father. She gave me a name, someone I'd never heard of, someone who'd moved away years ago and whom she hadn't spoken to since ending the affair. She didn't even know if he was still alive or where he was. I had been created from a 6-month affair born of loneliness and mental illness, and then I'd spent my whole life paying the price for it, feeling the weight of a secret I didn't even know existed. I left that night without another word. I went home, I cried for hours, and then I made a decision. I was going to find my biological father if he was still alive. I was going to get the DNA results to confirm what we all now knew to be true, and then I was going to decide whether any of these people deserved to remain in my life. The next few weeks were torture. I sent off the DNA test first thing the next morning. I hired a private investigator to track down my biological father, using the name my mom had given me. I ignored dozens of calls and texts from my family members, each one apologizing or explaining or begging me to come talk to them. Sarah sent me a 10-page letter explaining that she'd been in therapy dealing with her own issues around feeling like our mom had always protected me more, always worried about me more, and she'd convinced herself that the DNA thing was just a theory, not reality, and she'd wanted to hurt me the way she'd felt hurt our whole lives. Marcus called crying, saying he wished he'd been a better brother, that he'd noticed how differently I was treated, but had never said anything because it benefited him to be the golden child. My dad sent a text that just said, "You'll always be my daughter, no matter what the test says," which felt like too little too late after a lifetime of emotional distance. And my mom sent voice messages that I couldn't even bring myself to listen to, her voice thick with tears and regret. The private investigator found my biological father within a week. His name was David Richardson. He was 56 years old. He'd never married, never had kids that he knew of, and he was living in a small town about 3 hours away, working as a high school English teacher. The investigator asked if I wanted him to make contact, and I said yes, because I needed to know where I came from. I needed to see if maybe there was someone out there who I actually resembled, who I actually had a real connection to. David agreed to meet me at a coffee shop halfway between our towns, and when I walked in and saw him sitting there, it was like looking in a mirror. He had my green eyes, my auburn hair streaked with gray, my tall, lean build, my long fingers, even the same way of holding a coffee cup. He stood up when he saw me, and I watched his face go through the same realization, and he just said, "Oh my God." We sat down, and I told him everything. He'd had no idea my mom had gotten pregnant. She'd never told him, and learning that he had a 28-year-old daughter sitting across from him clearly shook him to his core. We talked for 4 hours that first meeting. He told me about his life, his love of literature and art, his struggles with relationships, his regret over the affair with my mom, and how he'd known it was wrong but had been lonely and made bad choices. He asked me about my life, and when I told him I was a graphic designer who loved art and reading and creative work, his eyes lit up in a way my dad's never had. We agreed to meet again, to take things slow, to do our own DNA test just to be absolutely certain, but we both already knew the truth. When the results from the commercial DNA test came back 3 weeks after my birthday, they confirmed it officially. 0% match with Robert, my legal father, the man whose name was on my birth certificate. The testing company had also connected me with David through their database, since he'd taken a test years ago out of curiosity, and it showed a 99% match as my biological father. I finally had my answer, the truth I'd been unconsciously seeking my whole life. Now came the hard part, deciding what to do with this information and how to move forward. I agreed to meet with my family, all of them together, 1 month after my birthday. We met at a neutral location, a private room at a local restaurant, and I brought the DNA results with me. I placed them on the table in front of everyone, and the silence was deafening. "So it's confirmed," I said simply. "Robert is not my biological father, and you all treated me differently my entire life because of a secret some of you knew and others suspected. But nobody ever had the decency to tell me." I looked at each of them in turn. "Sarah, you weaponized this information to hurt me on my birthday because you were jealous and petty, and instead of working through your own issues in therapy, you decided to blow up my life. Marcus, you stood by and watched me be treated as less than our whole lives and said nothing because it benefited you. Dad, or Robert, whatever I'm supposed to call you now, you suspected I wasn't yours, and instead of loving me anyway or having an honest conversation, you just kept me at a distance and made me feel like I was never good enough. And Mom, you built my entire existence on a lie. You let me suffer through feeling like an outsider. You watched your husband treat me differently, and your daughter know this secret, and you said nothing for 28 years. The tears were streaming down my face now, but I kept going. I've met my biological father. His name is David, and in the few weeks I've known him, he's shown me more genuine interest and connection than most of you have shown me in my entire life. He didn't run away when he found out about me. He didn't treat it like a shameful secret. He was shocked, yes, but he was also curious and kind and wanted to know me. My mom was sobbing openly now. Sarah looked devastated. Marcus looked ashamed, and Robert just looked broken. I don't know what our relationship looks like going forward. I continued. I don't know if I can forgive any of you, and I don't know if I even want to try. What I do know is that I deserved better than this. I deserved honesty. I deserved to be loved fully and completely, regardless of my genetics, and I deserved a family that didn't treat me like a secret or a burden or a mistake. I stood up to leave, and my mom reached for my hand. "Please," she begged, "please don't cut us out of your life. I know I made terrible mistakes, but I do love you. I always have, even if I showed it poorly." I pulled my hand away gently. "Maybe you did, Mom, but love without honesty isn't really love at all, is it? It's just guilt and obligation dressed up as affection." And with that, I left. In the months since that confrontation, I've been building a relationship with David, my biological father, and it's been healing in ways I didn't expect. We share so many interests and personality traits, and he's introduced me to extended family members who have welcomed me with open arms. I've kept limited contact with my mom, mostly text messages where she updates me on family news and continues to apologize, and I've told her that maybe someday we can rebuild something, but it's going to take time and probably a lot of therapy on both our parts. Robert sent me a letter a few weeks ago, a real heartfelt letter where he admitted that he'd suspected the truth early on, but had been too proud and hurt to address it, and instead of dealing with his pain in a healthy way, he'd punished an innocent child for her mother's mistakes. He said he regretted every moment of distance between us, and that if I was willing, he'd like to try to build a real father-daughter relationship now, based on choice rather than obligation. I haven't responded yet because I'm still processing all of it. Marcus has been trying to make amends, showing up for me in small ways, asking about my life, actually listening when I talk, and I appreciate the effort even if it can't erase decades of being overlooked. And Sarah and I had one final conversation where she admitted she'd been carrying around toxic jealousy for years, that she'd seen how much our mom worried about me and misinterpreted it as favoritism when really it was guilt, and that her joke at my birthday was the culmination of years of misdirected anger and resentment. She's in intensive therapy now, working through her issues, and she asked if maybe in a year or two we could try to rebuild our sister relationship. I told her maybe, but that it would be on my terms and my timeline, and she'd have to prove through consistent actions over a long period that she was genuinely sorry and genuinely working to be better. Looking back on everything, I don't regret taking that DNA test or confronting my family or demanding the truth. Some people have told me I should have just thrown the test away and let sleeping dogs lie, that I destroyed my family over something that didn't need to be confirmed, but I disagree completely. The destruction was already there, hidden under layers of secrets and lies and differential treatment, and all I did was bring it to light. I gave myself the gift of truth on my 28th birthday, even though it was wrapped in cruelty by my sister, and that truth has allowed me to finally understand why I always felt like I didn't quite belong, why I was always trying so hard to earn love that should have been freely given. I'm building a life now based on authentic relationships with people who choose to know and love the real me, and that includes my biological father David, who I'm grateful to have found even under these painful circumstances. So to everyone watching this, I want you to understand that sometimes the truth hurts, sometimes families aren't what we think they are, and sometimes the kindest thing you can do for yourself is demand honesty even when it shatters everything you thought you knew. Like this video if you think I was justified in what I did, if you think taking that test and confronting my family was the right move. Subscribe to this channel for more real stories about family drama, secrets revealed, and the messy, complicated reality of human relationships. And please, drop your thoughts in the comments section because I genuinely want to know what you would have done in my situation, whether you think I went too far or not far enough, and whether you think families can heal from betrayals like this, or if some things are just too broken to fix. Thank you for listening to my story, for letting me share this painful chapter of my life, and for being part of this community where we can all process the difficult, messy parts of being human together. I'll see you all in the next story.